All right, so we're back talking about Clint Brooks today for English 250. Um, so Clint Brooks, this is his thing. Is I'm gonna go through the words again. Why am I gonna go through the words again? And by the way, you can already see that I'm influenced by Clint Brooks because of the way that I force you to actually look at the words on the page. I don't come in and just tell you what I learned in a book. A lot of textbooks, for example, just summarize ideas by famous thinkers. But I don't want to give you a summary of ideas by famous thinkers. That's why I keep stopping class to go point at the exact words that the guy said, because it's very, very important to focus on individual words. Um, so let's take a look at what he said one more time. And I'm repeating myself a little bit, but I want to make sure we have this. Um, the problem with literary criticism, with kind of talking about works of art, comes from a temptation. Uh, uh, People yield to a temptation to take certain remarks of which we make about the poem for the essential core of the poem itself. Um, some classic examples. I'll give you one from student life and one from my life. The one from student life is the classic thing where you're told to read a book for class, and instead of reading the book, you watch the movie. Or actually, here's a better example. You're told to read a book for class, and instead of reading a book, you read the Wikipedia summary of the book. And I understand a lot of students feel like, well, the summary is basically the same thing. Doesn't it contain all the shit that's in the book? And it does tell you what happens to the characters in the book. Um, but what you have done is you've thrown the work of art away in favor of a summary. You've taken the summary is a summary of the poem, but or of the novel. But what you've done is that you've thrown the novel away and replaced it with something about the novel, a summary about the novel, so that you're not actually engaging in the work of art itself. Your teachers are frustrated by this because they want you to experience the actual work of art. And if you're only engaging with the Wikipedia summary, you're not really engaging with the work of art. My students, for example, do it all the time. I'll have my students do a paper on a Shakespeare play, or I'll have my students do a paper on a movie for film class. And what I get is them just telling me what happened to the characters. Um, Never once, like I can get a paper on, actually for some of your papers in 250. Sometimes you guys will say, I'm going to compare this work of art to Alexander Pope. But then you don't actually quote Alexander Pope. You just sort of summarize what I said about him, because you're not actually using the actual words. My film students, for example, will give me papers that look like, it just looks like they're not discussing the movie. They look like they're discussing the Wikipedia summary of the movie. And that's bad, because it's film class. We're supposed to be talking about films, which means the specific choices filmmakers, actors, authors, writers make. And if you're just talking about a Wikipedia summary, you've thrown all of that away. An example from my own life. This is why teachers don't want you watching the movie instead of the book, reading a Wikipedia summary instead of the book, because of Clint Brooks. Because Clint Brooks is like, you're throwing the art away to get to something the art contains, right? The art, I mean, because the summary is not wrong, it's just limited. Um, in my own life, something that drives some people crazy is I love Shakespeare. I'm a huge Shakespeare fan, but there are quite a few Shakespeare adaptations, even famous and important ones, that don't use Shakespeare's words. So, for example, the Julia Stiles movie, 10 Things I Hate About You, is an adaptation of Shakespeare's Taming of the Shrew. Scotland, Pennsylvania is an adaptation of Shakespeare's Macbeth. It takes place in a McDonald's. Macbeth with the big M. It's cute. Um, there's a very, very famous adaptation of Macbeth that is considered to be one of the greatest movies of all time. It's called Throne of Blood. It is a Japanese adaptation of Macbeth from the 1950s. Um, and there's a stack of these. There's a version of Othello that takes place in a high school basketball situation. And there's all kinds of these things. And people will often ask me what I think of them. And I go, I haven't seen them, which is not true. I've seen some of them now. But, I actually just saw 10 Things I Hate About You like a week ago. It's fucking great. But usually I tell people, I'm like, I haven't seen that movie. And they go, I can't believe you're a Shakespeare guy. Why didn't you see the movie? I thought you would really love that. But because it's based off Shakespeare. But here's the thing. It's based off Shakespeare in the sense that the things that happen to the characters are very similar to the things that happen in Shakespeare play. But if they're not actually using Shakespeare's words, I kind of don't care. Because the reason I read Shakespeare is because I care about the language. So if you delete the language, I'm a whole lot less interested, even in a great movie like Throne of Blood, which is an adaptation of Macbeth, but it's in Japanese, and I want to hear the words Shakespeare wrote. I don't speak Japanese. Oops, okay, my things are flipping over. So that doesn't really work for me in terms of, that's not what I'm looking for. Because I'm interested in Shakespeare, it means I'm interested in his language. So, all right, with that in mind, let's go back into this and take a look at what Clint Brooks says. So, Clint Brooks, who says it's very bad to take a summary of the poem or something about the poem and use it to replace the poem. Oh, the other student example of this is when students say, what Shakespeare was trying to say was, and then they put Shakespeare's words in other terms. And then they talk about they don't talk about what Shakespeare says. They talk about what Shakespeare meant. You throw away what he actually says, and you focus on what he meant. You have discarded the art and replaced it with something else, summary. And it's all kinds of things. Some people, there's a fancier way to do this where you, instead of pulling the summary out of a work of art, you pull the philosophy out of the work of art. But if you still throw the art away, I feel like you've still fucked up somehow. Some people will teach Shakespeare like it's a history class, and they teach about the kings and the queens and what really happened. But in that case, I feel like you've thrown Shakespeare away. You've taken the history out and thrown the artwork away. So to me, and to Clint Brooks, the only real way to talk about art is to talk about the actual words on the page, and this is Clint Brooks' main point. Okay. So he quotes this guy as W.M. Urban puts it in Language and Reality, the general principle of the inseparability of intuition and expression holds with special force for the aesthetic intuition. Here it means that form and content, or content and medium, are inseparable. The artist does not first intuit his object and then find the appropriate medium. It is rather through his medium that he intuits the object. And I realize that's a very confusing way to put that, and I actually really don't love that. But the point is the inseparability of intuition and expression. You can underline that. Inseparability of intuition and expression. The inseparability of intuition, that's the idea, and expression, those are the words that you use. Another way to say that is the inseparability of the content, that's the ideas, and the form, the words that you use, or in the case of movies, the pictures, or in the case of painting, images, or whatever it is. This is really crucial. They're inseparable. The words and the ideas are inseparable. You cannot just pull them apart and throw the word. You can't grab the idea and throw the words away. I mean, you can. You can grab the idea and throw the words away. But if you do that, you're no longer doing art. You're no longer talking about art. You're now talking about philosophy or history. And actually, if I can connect this in a bigger way, Clint Brooks is writing this because of Wordsworth. Is one of the reasons why Clint Brooks is writing what he's writing. Because, let's do this. You guys liked Wordsworth. And Wordsworth's point is that the art is an expression of the emotions of its author, right? Perfectly nice idea. We all liked that. But there's a problem in this idea. And the problem is this. If art is the expression of an individual author, then what people were doing after Wordsworth is they would read a poem or a play, figure out talk about the emotion, connect it to the life of the artist. Oh, you can really see the reason, Shakespeare wrote Hamlet is because his little son named Hamnet died. And the play Hamlet, which is about, fathers and sons' death, is really an expression of Shakespeare's relationship with his son who died. And then they're like, okay, now I understand Hamlet, and then they throw it away. What they've done is, I told you about these people, my students who replace the work of art with summary, philosophers students pull the summary out of the work of art, so they actually don't even look at the work of art, they just look at the summary, throw the art away. Historians, they'll pull the history out of the work of art, throw the art away. Philosophers will figure out the ideas in the work of art, throw the work of art away. But people who are real into Wordsworth have a really bad habit of pulling out the biography of the person who wrote it and then throwing the art away. Because if art is just a vehicle for learning about the emotions of the author, then a lot of literary criticism just becomes like a fancy kind of biography where you're reading poems to find out about people, the author specifically. And Clint Brooks says, no, don't do that. This isn't about, he says, thinking about art in terms of authors is a mistake. You should be paying attention to the words on the page. You're not supposed to throw the artwork away once you get to the biography of the person who wrote it. So, all right, pick it up in the next video.